Hey everybody, it's Mike Johnson here on PWInsiderElite.com with a very special free audio for everyone to listen to. We're sitting down with Smashing Pumpkins frontman turned former TNA president Billy Corgan, who just earlier this week finally, officially, not an imaginary story, settled all the claims with TNA Impact Wrestling and Impact Ventures. And as Anthem Sports Entertainment announced, he has been completely, this entire legal situation is completely cleared up and resolved. So Billy mentioned when he on Twitter a couple of weeks ago he's going to do a couple of interviews about the situation. We reached out to him. He was kind enough to give us some time, and for that, sir, I thank you. So hi, how are you? And a bit of a different situation from the last time you and I spoke about wrestling.
That's true. I have to correct you, and we should. It's going to be like one of those things like at the top of a show. We're gonna. It's like a Russo thing. We're gonna set it up, and then you got to wait to get it. I actually have not released all claims.
Okay.
So we'll get to that later, but
okay.
So it's not totally cleared up, but it is cleared up with
Impact and
Anthem. Yes.
Impact. So Anthem and Impact the company.
Yes, all good there.
All right, so should we talk about this now, or do you want to
I
make
think
me wait?
You got to build up for it.
All right, because obviously there's some other defendants in this lawsuit, but we'll get back to that. So let's get to the obvious question: why did all this fall apart? You obviously were going to buy the company. You were looking to buy at least a majority ownership of it. What happened between yourself, Dixie Carter, Arrowlux, and all the other moving parts? Why, at the end of the day, did this company not become Billy Corgan's possession?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. It's not that simple to answer. So, there are some things I can't discuss. So it's complicated. So you may want to lead up to that a little bit, or we can kind of go at it piecemeal.
Let's do it this way. Talk about what led to you initially investing money into TNA, and right before Slammiversary, because the way it certainly seems is that had you not invested that money, TNA would have gone out of business that week.
That's true.
So in many ways, you were the savior, and you gave them the bridge to get to where they are now in November of 2016. So if nothing else, you kept that company alive for several months.
Yeah, and in return, I was called a predatory lender and a loan shark.
I was going to bring that up. I was going to bring that up because that was certainly in the court paperwork.
Yeah,
we are going to talk about that.
What is that saying? No good deed goes unpunished.
Yeah, exactly. So what leads to you going, I'm going to put money into this, because I do want to call you out on something here.
Sure.
1999 or 2000, you could have put money into ECW.
That's true.
You chose not to. TNA at that point where you decided to put money into it certainly did not have had not captured the imagination and did not have the focal point of an audience the way that I think ECW did, even towards the end of ECW. So let me ask you this. Why did you decide to invest in TNA when a decade before, or 9 or 10 years before, you had decided, I'm not going to invest in ECW? When you look at the two on a scale, certainly there were more positives to ECW in that moment than there might be for TNA in the moment where you did invest.
Well, that's a really good question. Going back to the ECW situation for a second, when it was pitched to me by Paul Heyman to invest $1 million to buy 10% of ECW, Paul wasn't aware that I was aware of a lot of the debts that he owed talent. And not too ironically, the money he was asking me for was going to be olayed right out of his wallet straight into, let's say, Taz's pocket and PJ Polacco's pocket. So I was skeptical in that situation because I realized that money really wasn't going to go to invest in the company. It was going to go just to pay off talent. At least that was my assertion. And plus, I didn't have any experience in the professional wrestling business at that point. I hadn't worked in it. I hadn't produced anything. I hadn't booked anything. I was just a dude. In the TNA situation, I'd worked in the company for a while. I'd worked in the indies for a while. I had a sense of not only what I wanted from professional wrestling, but I also had relationships. I had people I could count on, people who I could lean on for an opinion. And let's not forget that even media like yourself has risen up through the years, where you have a better read on, let's call it, the professional wrestling landscape as it pertains to the business side of it. So I had a sense of, if I invested in TNA under, let's say situation X, and I got out of it situation Y, well, then it would be worth it. I had my own reasons for it, and I thought if I could turn on those reasons, then it would be a good investment. I realized where a lot of people from the outside saw it as a poor investment, including my own lawyers, who told me repeatedly not to invest in the company. But yeah, so that's maybe the difference.
So Slammiversary comes, you're already working with the company in a creative and a production aspect. You're helping them with music, you're producing segments, you're involved heavily in the creative end of it. At what point does Dixie Carter, who I'm assuming is the person that comes to you, approach you and say, we're dead in the water, we need your help? And what's your reaction to this? And why do you say, okay, I'm going to help you here, I'm going to put money out? Because it's been presented two different ways. One side, the side that was closest to you, or sources that were close to you, presented it as you had purchased a minority ownership in the company. Others at the time claimed to me, no, it's just a bridge loan. It could be used as a minority ownership, but it's not really. And I eventually decided to go with the side that said he's purchased a minority ownership when I broke that story, and I wrote about that story Slammiversary weekend. So I'm curious, what happened to lead up to that moment where you decided, okay, I'm gonna put money into this company, and what was your understanding of what it was when you put that money in? Was it minority ownership, or was it just a loan with the potential to do something down the line?
Right. Okay. There's a lot of questions there. June or whenever it was not the first approach that I was made in terms of money. There were other sort of, let's call it soft approaches, at various times would I be interested in. And every time I was approached, the circumstances, the terms, whatever was thrown at me were so not even close to what I was thinking that I didn't even consider it for more than 5 seconds. June was different because I knew the company was sort of, like a ship about to hit a rock. And maybe because I'd gained some stature in the company, had good relationships with the talent, I started to be able to see if I could position myself into some sort of greater position of power, including the creative direction. Because as far as I was concerned, the creative direction needed even more overhaul than it was getting, and I'd gotten some. The idea of getting it, what would I need to invest to get to that position where it would have enough say with Dixie Carter that I could sort of, in essence, overrule anybody beneath me. So that was sort of the initial impetus that sort of led me down that trail. And I'm going to get to your question in a second. But I need to say in regards to that from the get-go, when it got, let's say, official in terms of money and what you get in exchange for X, Y, and Z, from that moment forward, I was misled by her as to many things about the company. So I wasn't getting, which gets into the, why I filed the lawsuit. And then the other thing that I've left dangling is I wasn't, if I tell you you're buying a car with 4 tires and an engine, and and the person gives you the money, and then you open the hood and there's no engine, you know what I mean? It's not the time to find out about that after you've already given your money. So that was the kind of situation I found myself after. To answer your question as far as the ownership stake, I never wanted to be a lender. I told her repeatedly I had no interest in being a lender. It was my lawyer, to his credit, who basically created a kind of an interesting legal device where my money would sort of float. In essence, I would have the shares procured. Nobody else could take those shares, and it would be up to me whether or not I can pull back out as a loan or go forward. So in essence, I did have control and, in my eyes, ownership of the shares, because nobody else could have bought those shares while I had that option. And that's where we get into the complications of the legal case.
So
you weren't wrong in reporting that I had ownership stake. And I think it says a lot, including a phone call I had with Dixie Carter, where she yelled at me for saying that I did have my minority ownership, because in her mind, and that followed all the way through to the trial in Nashville, she had to believe, or continues to believe, that at no point did I ever own a piece of the company, because that was the way that she sort of was able to convince herself and other people of other things.
The entire thing just seems like one big muckety-muck of a mess.
That's a really great legal way to put it.
And I, obviously, I'm trying to speak in layman's terms here so people can understand it, because I have to tell you, reading all of that paperwork was probably one of the most mind-blending experiences of my life. Like, it takes a lot for me to be mentally exhausted from reading, and I can't imagine what it was like living and going through this on either side of the case.
Well, let's not forget that one of the ways they were able to overcome my case in the courts was to say that a paper that they themselves signed and legally endorsed was illegal.
Well,
But try that one.
well,
Try that one on for size.
Well, that was one of the things that there was the contract, or the pledge agreement that was signed by everybody, that they later claimed was not enforceable in the state of Tennessee.
Right.
So why? And you may not. This might be a question for your lawyer. Why was it drafted and signed in the state of Tennessee if they knew it wasn't enforceable?
That's a great question, and that says a lot about the people I was in business with here.
So, at what point do you realize this is going to go wrong? Because I think if I'm looking at it from TNA's perspective, they're looking at it as, okay, Billy could be a minority owner, and he's going to work with Dixie and Aerolux and everybody else, and suddenly he wants control of the entire machine, and he doesn't want to work with anybody.
Okay, see,
so
I think
is that a fair assessment?
Okay, I think that from some of the reporting, including some of the reporting you had, and obviously you were talking to lots of different people, I think that gets to something that I would like to address.
Sure.
At one point in time, I agreed to a structure. This is before my last investment and I was named president. I agreed to a structure where I, in essence, was going to report up to other people. So I'm asking everybody listening, including yourself, why would somebody agree to that if at the end of the day they want to tear that up? The answer is I didn't. I agreed to it because I had every intention of operating under a new ownership / institutional culture that I would report in as part of it. In essence, I wouldn't run it. I only started to want to run it when I realized that the people I was in business with were lying to me. So once you're in, it's kind of like the mob. Once you're in, there's no easy way out. So for me, the easiest way out, and I'm saying that in quotations, was to take control of the company, to then root out the forces that I thought were negative to the company and were driving the company under, to then, in essence, save the company in the truest sense of the word, not only from itself financially, but also from itself institutionally.
So I think I know the answer to this. Based on the fact that you said that not all claims have been released, but who do you feel lied to you?
Well, I'd rather reserve that for. I mean, obviously, I'm pointing a finger at Dixie. I think that's pretty obvious. That's borne out in the legal case that's already been filed. As far as the other people go, I reserve that to whether or not I would go after them in a court of law. Right. And okay. And maybe this is the time to talk about it. In making this deal with Anthem. And I'm very happy with the deal, and I do sincerely wish them the best. I think they are the best people that have taken over the company, given the circumstances that as they played out and what I know now. But that said, in the deal that I made to make this finally resolve, and as you said at the beginning of this, and I've seen other headlines, I did not release all claims involved in this matter, and I specifically put in the paperwork that there were certain people that I was in business with within the company that I still have the ability to go after directly.
And the press release that came out yesterday, I did note on the site, I said I did wonder, based on the wording, whether this meant that Dixie Carter, Dean Broadhead, Serge Salinas were still potential defendants in legal proceedings. And I guess they are still potentially defendants if you choose to continue the situation.
I'll let you, draw your own conclusions to that. But yes, so as it sits right now, it's like I just want to get away from it and let the thing sit for a little while before I would decide whether or not I would want to continue. But right. What I'm trying to say, and I guess this is imbued in every answer I would give you today, is it's hard sometimes to explain your behavior when you know at the end of it that your behavior was born out of a certain set of facts that, as they were presented to you, which you later found out were not only not true, but were deliberately not true.
So, at what point does this make you a predatory lender?
Exactly.
So, because I mean, I thought that was an interesting legal argument that TNA made in this situation, which was that you had created basically, it was almost painted as if she had no choice and she decided she was forced into signing this agreement. But at the end of the day, no one made anybody sign anything here. No one made you hand your money over
I think,
and lend the money, and no one made her agree to these terms.
I think if we could just hit pause there for 1 second. I mean, not literally, I mean psychologically.
Right.
I think right there, in that moment, that is an incredible insight into the character of Dixie Carter. She was willing to turn on somebody who she called a friend, who had in her home, you know. She was willing to turn on somebody who 3 times, in 3 separate instances, saved her company and her ass. You know what I mean? Somebody who publicly defended her and worked hard. And at one point, I went a year without even receiving a salary. You know, so in that moment, that really reveals the true depth of depravity, that somebody would go so low in order to win the case. So to classify me as a predatory lender was laughable, because under what circumstance in my life could anybody point to, including my professional life and my professional career, where I'm set up to be a predatory lender? It's the exact opposite. I mean, I'm a guy who's blown money on art projects. You know what I mean? Predatory lender was I wanted to buy and invest in a company that I believed in the culture of the company, which I was helping to foster, nourish, and create, and invest in the talent involved. And once I realized that culture, in my estimation, as it existed then, was corrupt, then I wanted to elbow those people out of the way and take over so that the good people involved and the good things that were happening could continue. It was never sort of some sort of glory run. It was the last thing I wanted, which is why I didn't run around and do a bunch of press. You know, I was like, I just wanted to work.
At what point, what do you think that they wanted out of you that you were not willing to give them? Did they just want you to hand the money over and then just sit there silently?
Sorry, but do you have to be a little bit more specific for a lot of reasons, partially legally, but you have to be specific on when, because I think people wanted different things out of me at different times.
Okay. So you make this first infusion of cash, and, you know, the way they present it is the company, legally in their arguments, they presented it as you knew the company was going to be in a position where it was going to be sold, and before it was going to be sold, you were going to get your money back.
Are you talking about at the end or in the beginning?
At the end, the third time. Like, it seemed like, you know, they kept coming back to you based on the idea of this carrot of you're going to get your money back, but you're going to get your money back, and by the time you get your money back, everything will be stabilized within the company. You're just helping us get through this rocky period, because they claimed that they were transitioning their money from a deal where they were getting paid for their television, I guess by Destination America at this point, to they were doing the barter system where they were getting paid on a percentage of the advertising, and that was why the cash flow had so many issues. And to me, like, reading it, it didn't jive to me, but it just seemed like they kept waiting for some white horse to show up that was going to make things better, and until that white horse arrived, Billy could help us float through, and we'll take care of Billy before the white horse gets here. But it seemed like the white horse was never going to arrive.
Well, those are two convoluted issues which don't necessarily go together in my mind. So let's start real quick with the white horse.
Okay.
In my time in dealing with Dixie Carter in business, that is the way she operates. It's always the magical thing that's going to happen that never happens. If for the 100 magical things that she talked about that were going to happen, not one materialized. And which is why I think many people around her over time lose complete and utter faith and end up in contempt because they realize that they've been sold soap. As far as me, I don't really care any way that anybody would classify my interest in it because they had their own reasons whether they be legal or otherwise, to classify me as something other than I was. I was a hardworking employee for the company who was given a chance to invest in the company, to move the company forward, and I did so because I wanted to have more access and more opportunity on the creative side. Once I realized that the people I was getting in bed with couldn't be trusted, then they came back to me one more time for money. Well, that's when, like any shrewd businessman would do, and I am a shrewd businessman, I put my money on the table and I said, if you want this money from me, this is what you're going to have to give up. Which, of course, she later turned into this complete victim thing of, like, as if I put some gun to her head and made her sign over the presidency and do all these other things. She had every opportunity to go and get that money or create a deal with anybody. There was no restriction on her to do anything from anybody. So, again, the idea that I was sort of the guy that was handing over money waiting to get my money back, that seems to be sort of very, very, very strange for somebody of my intellect and experience in the entertainment business. I mean, that to me, if you got $1 billion, right? If you got $1 billion and somebody asks you for some money to keep their wrestling company going and they're going to give it back to you before they quote unquote sell it, okay, that makes sense. But when you don't have $1 gazillion and you give over almost all the money you have in your pocket, including to the point of wondering how you're going to pay your mortgage, I don't think you're doing that to get some interest back.
Right.
You're doing it because you see there's an opportunity for you culturally or whatever in business, and you want to take advantage of that opportunity. So to be classified as some sort of predator in a thing was laughable, because I wasn't from the outside of the culture, I was from inside the culture. So how predatory can you be?
When you made the third cash infusion, that's when they announced that you were president. When that announcement was made, and you've talked a lot about wanting to change the culture of the company, what changed in the day-to-day and how that company was operated in terms of you overseeing it versus Dixie Carter overseeing it? Because it was presented as she was shifting over to another role and you were going to run the day-to-day of TNA. How much of that actually happened? Because I didn't hear a lot about you actually being in the offices in Nashville.
Well, see, that's difficult, and they did try to make that part of their case to say that I didn't give a shit and I barely showed up. Not true at all. I was constantly on the phone. Look, there's no secret here, and we're talking about before Anthem, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There was no secret, and there were plenty of reports around that the company needed money, okay? So if you were named president of PNA, what would be your first responsibility to the company? It would be to reach around in the world that you have contact in. And I'm talking about, I talked to GoPro, I talked to Pop TV, I talked to digital equity investors, I talked to billionaires, I talked to people at Facebook, I talked to people in the upper echelons of the entertainment business to get a gauge on what the opportunities would be for the company going forward. Those were not conversations I was necessarily sharing with people that I didn't trust. I didn't need to be in Nashville to talk to the guy from GoPro.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Now, to add color to your question, the institutional things that I started to try to put into place, I found out very quickly that my presidency was being treated by her and the people that you would count as her surrogates as not real. She basically put out an unofficial order. You know, I'm not saying, you know, I got to be careful what I say here, but what I'm saying is my sense was that she let everybody know that had counted on her through the years that she wasn't going anywhere, and to treat my presidency as nothing more than a kind of a paper tiger thing. So when I started to actually try to push buttons in the company, people didn't respond.
At what point do you realize, all right, this has gone wrong and I've got to get my money out, or I've got to just get everybody out? Because you make three decisions between June...
Four if you want to be technical.
Okay, so you make four decisions to invest money into this company and to get more intertwined with the day-to-day of this company and to intermingle TNA with your own personal brand.
True.
At what point do you hit that wall and you say, this has all been a mistake, I should not have traveled down this road, and I need to extricate myself from the entire situation and get myself and my money the hell away from this situation? Is there a moment, or is it just, is it just like an avalanche where the snowball starts rolling and suddenly there's this huge deluge of ice and snow crashing down on you?
Well, it's a fantastic question, and I'm not sure I can answer it because of legal things.
Okay.
What I will say to is, and I think this is kind of where it all led up into the court stuff. I gave interviews before whatever was the pay-per-view where whatever happened now happened.
Bound for Glory.
Bound for Glory. Thank you. Because it's all been a blur. That the weeks leading up to that, I felt like a number of things was going to happen, and I was cool with whatever happened. I openly stated to everybody involved that I didn't mind if somebody else bought the company, and I made it clear what it would take for me to, from a business side, to accept that. And it was all within the terms of the contracts. I wasn't sort of inventing something. Does it make sense?
Right.
I'm trying to be clear here, but respect the legal stuff.
Now, you during those interviews you did at Sirius Radio and ESPN Radio and a couple of others, you made it pretty clear at one point you didn't know that the Bound for Glory shows were going to happen. You intended to be there. You were, as far as you were concerned, you were going to Orlando for those shows, but you could not guarantee those shows were happening, because you were not personally going to be funding them, obviously.
No, at that point I still planned on investing, and of course the price I was asking for was steep, but just like anything, if somebody's going to buy something and nobody else is buying, well, then you name your terms.
Right. So at what point does this get to the point of no return? Is it that weekend? Because like there's that meeting that Dixie has with the locker room where you're not there, and we've heard you declined to be there, and all we hear coming out of Bound for Glory is there's obvious tension between you and Dixie at those tapings. Is that where this kind of schism finally happens?
Well, I think it's safe to say that and I'm trying to be careful here, but
I understand, and again, I understand you're in a situation where you have to tread lightly.
Right. The circumstances that were engaged in that led to the transference of whatever happened was the point where let's just say that the way it went down wasn't the way I thought it was going to go down. Now,
okay.
My reaction to it was portrayed by the people involved as like everything from a hissy fit to he's just mad because he didn't get the company. Nothing of the truth. I just disagreed with the way the business was handled, and that was reflected in the lawsuit. Does it make sense?
Though, it makes sense, but you have to admit, though, you had to have not been happy that you weren't getting the company.
No,
at this point, you obviously wanted the company.
Listen, knowing what I know now, because you got to understand, a lot of facts came into evidence, including facts after I filed my lawsuit. I didn't even listen. I was the president of a major wrestling company and didn't even know there was a tax lien against the company.
Right.
Okay. Now, there are people in the company who are hired to report to people like me those types of things. So if they're not reporting those things, am I supposed to go to the state of Tennessee and say, by the way, is there a tax lien?
No, of course not.
If those things are not reflected in internal memos, conversations, stuff like that, what am I supposed to do? So I'm operating half blind.
Well, it was obvious from the court paperwork you were not aware that just prior to Bound for Glory, there were negotiations with WWE for them to potentially purchase the TNA assets.
Yes, that goes back to the whole situation where John Gaburek went to meet with Kevin Dunn.
So
you got to understand, and I'm going to be specific here because I think this helps kind of clarify the bigger question that you're asking that I can't really get into too deep. Okay, when the guy that you've worked with, John Gaburek, you know what I mean, and Dixie Carter, whose homes you stay in, and whose dinners you eat with, and you hang out with, and the kids and everything. When you call those people and say, I'm hearing the company's going to be sold to WWE, and they tell you there is no truth to the rumor, and less than 48 hours later they admit in front of lawyers that there is truth to the matter, what would you think?
I would think someone's lying.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm trying to say to you is there are little moments along the way where, somebody lifts up the other hand off your other eye, and then you see other things that are going on that are being purposely kept from you, which is why I have not waived my right to litigate certain things against certain individuals, because those people, in my estimation, willfully and purposely misled me to get me to do certain things or get me to not do certain things.
The Anthem Media and Entertainment comes into play. How does Anthem's involvement change the entire situation for you beyond the fact that, okay, Dixie has found someone else to invest and potentially purchase this company? There's a whole back and forth about, I believe the numbers was $900,000 that you would have gotten if the company was sold prior to the point that you had your investment paid back. So at what point does, this just all fall into lawyers and becomes about where's the money that I'm owed, and how much when Anthem comes in does it change the way you're looking at everything?
Well, that's tough because I have resolved everything with Anthem, so I have no issue with Anthem. And then by extension, they have bought the company. So by extension, I no longer have an issue with the company. Right. So my only issues are with the individuals who I believe, willfully and purposely misled me to get me to do certain things, okay, or not do certain things. So when you're asking about it, it's like, again, I wasn't able to talk publicly about certain aspects of the case at the time. So I would read, I don't know if it was on your site or other people's site, about how I was, so angry about this and angry about that. And of course, I guess given that atmosphere, some of the things that I tweeted out would have been taken that way. But my anger wasn't necessarily directed at Anthem as much as it was directed at the situation, because as far as I was concerned, I had the paperwork to say this is the way this should be resolved. Now, that said, it's all been resolved, so there's really nothing to discuss about it because that gets into what I agreed to. Right. So now, that's where I have to sort of kind of parse the truth around things.
All right, so I have a question for you, and you may not be able to answer this, and maybe only Dixie Carter can answer this. You've said numerous times here people willfully lied to you and they willfully misled you. Why, in your mind, would someone ask you to help them protect and save their company and potentially even buy their company and then do these things to you? Why do you, and again, I realize you may not be able to answer this, why do you think that happened? Why do you think they did this?
There's a little joke that I make about Dixie Carter. And it goes something like this. She survived Hulk Hogan, Eric Bischoff, Vince Russo, Dutch Mantell, Bruce Pritchard, and Jeff Jarrett. And now, by extension, Billy Corgan. Okay? So if you add up those list of people that she, quote unquote, and this is my own joke, that she survived, then you say, what makes a person want to do that? And I think the simplest answer is the truest answer. You have somebody who's so desperate to be in that spot that they will literally do anything, say anything, be anything, and rub anybody out of the way to maintain that spot. And there's a common belief that you hear, obviously when you're involved with TNA professionally, as I was, there's a common belief that you hear that Dixie's kind of dumb and is easily worked. I would like to posit to the world a completely different theory, which is the exact opposite. She's the ultimate worker because she's worked all those people, including me. She gets you to believe something about her that's not true and maybe gets you to underestimate her intelligence or her ruthlessness so that she can sort of somehow still come out on top. And the fact that she's willing to be so publicly humiliated repeatedly, I think shows you how deep she is invested in the public personality or the public opportunity that she wants to have. Don't ask me the deeper psychology because I'm not a psychologist, but I've rarely seen anything like it, and I've been in the entertainment business for 30 years.
So you've come out of this. I'm assuming you've gotten, and I'm assuming the terms are confidential here, but I'm assuming you got at least what you put into the company plus X. And that plus X made you happy, and you signed away your issues with Anthem and Impact Ventures and TNA Impact Wrestling.
Is that a question?
You have made. Yeah. No. I'm setting up the question. you've made it clear you're not done with pro wrestling. With that said, could you lend me $1.8 million? So I'm sure you're going to get that question a lot in the next couple of months from everybody in wrestling that you run into. But you say you still want to do something in pro wrestling. Do you have an idea of what you want to do? Like, you had all these meetings with GoPro and people at Facebook and everything else. Are we looking at Billy Corgan trying to launch wrestling ABC promotion? I mean, there are some people who have posited a theory to me that, the half the roster for TNA is going to walk out and wait for you to start something. So and you may not have these answers, or you might not be willing to tip your hand here. And if you're not, I don't blame you. But what do you want to do in wrestling if you're not done in pro wrestling after all this?
Well, I like to think that if I continue, I'd like to be part of the positive change that I still think needs to come for the business overall. And one note of encouragement was when I would meet with people in these upper echelons of entertainment, they would say to me, if you're running this company, which at the time was TNA, we really like where it can go because we see this coming down the road and we see this, and you're the type of person that can sort of translate the space. In essence, what people in the upper echelons of media and digital entertainment want to hear is that not that wrestling's going to stay the same, but that wrestling is willing to evolve for what television will be like going forward on the internet. Because not everybody in that world agrees with the WWE brand being so insular. Now, I know many people at WWE would not agree with that, but that's the way a lot of those people perceive it. It's like WWE is a very, very powerful entity, and there's no disrespect there, but they run their business a very, very particular way. That's not necessarily the way the digital sphere looks at content going forward. They see it as more relationship-based and people working together to create kind of unique opportunities. Not a big megalithic company saying this is the way we do stuff and take it or leave it. So I'd like to think that we can be part, and I'm including David Lagana in this because we're partnering up on what we're going to do.
I was going to ask you about Lagana next.
Yeah.
So
I'd like to think that people like Lagana and I can set up a model that is much more talent positive and health conscious, and a lot of things that I think still need to evolve within the wrestling business that will fit actually quite nicely with where the digital culture is going, and it's going there quickly. So that's kind of where my mind is. As far as just starting a promotion, I think you fall under the same laws of gravity that everyone else does. Top talent deserves to be paid. Who's going to pay you in return? Are you in a broadcast model, which most indications are broadcast television is diminishing in its power as people move more and more over to the internet? Obviously, that's why Vince started the over-the-top network for WWE, which was one of the master strokes in the history of not only professional wrestling but entertainment. So as these shifts are occurring, and like I said, they're occurring quickly, I'd like to be part of the positive change in that. And I would say there's more energy right now on being at the forefront of the way the culture is going to change than just starting another promotion that's going to have to compete in the same space as everybody else, and you're going to have to build a culture from the ground up, which is why I was willing to invest in a culture like TNA, because then I wouldn't have to build a culture. I already knew the culture.
And I'm assuming there's no time frame for when you're looking to or you're probably still exploring options here, but I'm assuming there's no time frame of, okay, by February of 2017, we're going to launch something.
I think it would be, in the first half of next year. If I'm going to do something, I think it would have to happen fairly quickly.
Gotcha.
I have a solo album coming out in the spring, and so that's going to keep me busy. And then, the Pumpkins remain sort of a question mark as far as time and effort. So between solo, Pumpkins, and then being a father, and also then still wanting to be a part of this crazy world of professional wrestling, I feel like I'll have to choose wisely, but I'll have to choose quickly.
Right. You mentioned Dave Lagana. Obviously, he gave notice and he decided to resign from TNA. Talk a little bit about what led to, from your perspective, what led to him following you and leaving with you, so to speak, when your attempts at taking over TNA ended.
I actually feel that's slightly unfair to David. I feel like he was dissatisfied with where the company was going before that. I think he felt strongly about where I was going to go with the company because it aligned with his vision. And so I think when I left and I was drummed out, when I was, in his estimation, sort of someone who was changing the culture for the better and willing to invest in the company, and there were people there that were willing to force me out for power reasons, not because I was, where I'd been beneficial to the company. I think he saw that as the writing was on the wall that they were going to do that to anybody. That in essence, no amount of contribution or no amount of tenure was going to mean anything to anybody. Now that
Right.
I can't speak for what Anthem would have done if I'd stayed or David had stayed or whatever. I can't speak for that, but I feel like he made that decision independently, and I think I'd rather let him speak for that. But my sense of it is he didn't so much follow me as me and him are of the same mind of where wrestling can go in the 21st century, and very few people are really after it.
Yeah, I want to clarify. I don't mean that he followed you like a puppy dog out the door.
Yeah,
Just,
I just
you and he have ended up in working on whatever this is together.
Yeah, I think that I would put it to you this way. I think he and I both felt that there was an opportunity. There was a moment there at TNA where ratings were improving, the culture was improving, the talent was working hard, the angles were starting to click, fans were starting to become more and more satisfied with the product. Things were happening. And then it didn't work out the way we wanted, and so the things we were after, we were like, well, we're definitely not going to get them here. So do we have to build them, or do we have to go somewhere else to try to build it with somebody else? And so that's kind of where we're at.
What do you think the next year is gonna foretell for TNA?
I don't really want to be in the prognosticating business. Is that even a word? My dealings lately with Anthem have been positive, and I don't, as I often said, and I even go back to an interview you and I did, a couple years ago. I think it's wrong to root against the talent. You know what I mean? I think it's fun sometimes to play baseball and talk about who's in charge and who's booking and da-da-da. But at the end of the day, I want to see those people have jobs. So I can only wish the best and hope that whatever they're after is stable and successful, because the talent that are there deserve that. And that's the long and short of it. There's tons of great talent in the world, and who's free when and who's going to be available to do what if I'm doing X, Y, and Z, that's all down the road. But right now, I mean, I've had a lot of talent contact me and ask me what I think, and I tell them all, and these are even some people that I'm very close to. I say, just see if you feel good about the way you're being treated, and if you're being treated, then make a decision for yourself and your family.
Do you regret anything about this whole experience and about the decisions that you made along the way?
No, not particularly. I would just say this much: if I'd been told the truth, or I'd been given an accurate read on where the company was at the different times that I invested, I probably wouldn't have taken the path that I did. That said, once I found out where this was going, I'm totally fine with the way I pursued it, even though a lot of people misread it. It was not a tantrum. It was not a predatory lender. It was somebody who felt very passionate about the company and was willing to risk, a small personal fortune to take a chance. And to me, that's the real story of my tenure here. Was I got involved, I worked hard, I gained trust, and with the people I was involved with, my stature in the company grew. I saw where the product was getting better. I took a chance. The chance didn't work out. Okay, move on. I'm happy that somebody stepped up to the plate and put their money where their mouth is as far as the company went. It's not a business for everybody, so it takes somebody who really believes in it. And so hopefully they have somebody who will believe in it and will make the best company possible.
Just got a couple more questions, and I know you got to go. Let me ask you this, and this may not be a question that you can answer because it's a what-if question, but what if they had come to you and given you all the information that you feel was withheld from you? Do you think you still would have made that investment, or would it have been a situation like Paul Heyman and ECW where, okay, this isn't for me?
If I'd been given an accurate read on the company from the get-go, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
So then it's fair to say that if you had known if you had known what was down Alice's rabbit hole, you would not have gone down there, and June would have been the end of TNA, most likely.
Well, I can't say that because, look, I mean, if you take the assertion that I'm making, for all I know, there was somebody else standing there ready to write a check.
That is true. We can't
It
roll
could have
that
been a situation where my check was taken because the terms involving me were more favorable. I mean,
Well,
I really don't. Look. I don't want to run around the world and